Kia ora everybody. I'm speaking with Gwyn Thurlow, aka the @_the_hunter _NZ. How's your
Hello.
How's your weekend been, Gwyn?
Good. Yeah, this weekend's been pretty chilled actually. I haven't been up to too much. Just hanging with family this weekend.
Nice. And tell us about last weekend. You were doing quite a lot last weekend, successful as well.
Yeah, yep. So last weekend was Labour Long weekend, and I always try and get away for a trip. So a mate of mine and my brother went down to South Western and had a good weather window on the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and then had a poke around for some tar and managed to get a good old 13-inch bull, which was great. Nice spring bull tar hunting, which I really enjoy this time of year.
Yeah. What does it for you about this time of year, mate?
Oh, they're just in a little bit more reasonable places to access, and you have, nicer weather than middle of winter or in the rut. And the big boys are sort of really hungry, so you can often get into those creeks and find something with some decent hooks.
Yeah, man. And so they were quite bleached. Was the Cape still holding at this time of year? Or?
Yeah, the Cape's fine. So right about now, there's still a lot of snow about, so they haven't started molting, and you can still find some good Capes. They're not as good as the winter Capes, but there's certainly still worth having as a rug or.
They're all frozen. Really frozen. Oh, here you go. You're back. So good as having as a cape, as a rug, and then you went still. What'd you get up to?
So we got onto this a couple of good bulls and managed to get him, and I took his head skin out. I'm not sure whether I'll mount him or not because I have a couple of good bulls, good 13-inch bulls already. So probably the next one I'd mount personally would have to have a 14-inch set of hooks.
Yeah. And so what sort of was your aim for the hunt, or what was your decision behind taking that animal in particular? How were you sort of getting an idea if that was a taker?
That one was right on dusk. He was in a mob or on a face where we had seen about 6 bulls over the course of the day, and we knew 2 of them were good bulls and the rest were sort of 12 inches and 11s. And we just I like to get a result from a trip. I know a lot of people want a tar, and you got to take your opportunities when you can, because you go on a lot of trips and you don't get one. And so when you see a big bull, I think you've got to take your opportunities while you can.
Yeah, mate. And so different area to where you were a fortnight earlier with the guy that sort of encouraged me to get you on this podcast, Ben Humphrey. It almost looked from the outside like they were 2 totally different experiences. Obviously, weather and range, and then terrain's different as well, and then number of animals seem to be different. So if you could compare and contrast, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, obviously you alluded to Ben. So Ben's a good mate of mine, Ben Humphrey, who is in the Bay there with you, and I think he's in the president of your Deerstalkers branch. So he's a great guy. And we had another mate, Lockie, who hasn't had an opportunity to find a good bull yet, and we were trying to get one for him. So Ben and I, we same time 2 years ago did the King of the Mountain film with Cam Henderson at Hunters Journal, and then we thought, well, with this tar cull going on and our mate Lockie really wanting to get a bull, we thought we'd try the East Coast with him, because it can be a little bit better going at this time of year than the West Coast. And yeah, so we went in the 2 thumbs on that trip. So we flew in quite far back into some really popular tar country actually, and it was interesting to see the results of all the helicopter culls which had happened over the winter. Obviously, they'd gone over the valley in 2 stages because there was 2 types of carcasses. So one set that was a bit older and more decomposed, and then obviously the last push just before they got the 10,000 target. And so we saw, you know, quite a few dead tar in most creeks or gut systems, or where you'd expect to see tar. There was at least 1 or 2 dead tar, and obviously the chopper had just gone through and sort of cherry picked the valley and sort of kept moving around. So, but in saying that, there was still tar there, a lot of animals to look at still, and we just didn't find a bull on that East Coast trip.
Mm-hmm. And so what was the helicopter that flew you in? Did he sort of give you good hope or any information, or was he also equally unsure about what you'd find?
No, so he wasn't involved in the tar control himself. So we were flying out of Mesopotamia, so Malcolm Prowling's operation there, his chopper. We actually had a spot in mind, and the weather was so bad that he just ended up dumping us through a weather window in a valley that we had no map for and hadn't planned sort of to be there. So it was a little bit of a curveball. We were a little bit up too high for that time of the year as well. So we were sort of, in my opinion, not low enough in altitude into the little creeks where the spring growth is. So we ended up spending a couple of days up too high in the snow and ice, and then went down lower and found the animals. But he just put us where he could, and he did express his views in saying, you know, there's better ways to manage it, and everyone has their own views on how to manage it. And he obviously has his safari operation as well. So, you know, for him, they're a resource and they're an income. So they're important to his business. And obviously, as a rec hunter, people fly in with him as well. So he probably would like to see a few tar around still.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so how did the conditions and environment differ this time on the West Coast?
So completely, actually on completely different environment. So we were in a classic East Coast big valley with shingle slides and you know, open creeks and not a tree to be seen. And up in the tussock, not much scrub. And then the West Coast, we were down South Westland, so not far from the glaciers, and that's steep, you know, really vertical classic glacier formed valleys, so steep sides and lots of monkey scrub, and you know, you lose the bulls in and out of the scrub, and then so you've got to do a lot more glassing and have a lot more patience on the West Coast than you do on the East Coast.
Nice, mate. So how long have you been alpine hunting for, and how's it sort of shaped what you've done and when it comes to tar and all the other alpine species?
Yeah, so I mean, tar and chamois are my focus. I'd probably say chamois is my #1 New Zealand game animal. I'd hunt them 365 days a year if I could. And then I just really enjoy being in the mountains and in the hills. How do I get into it? So we've got a mad keen uncle in our family who's a really, really good hunter, and he used to do meat hunting, and he was a high country shepherd and worked on Molesworth, and he introduced me and my brother into Nelson Lake's tops. So we sort of got into that in our late teens when we were sort of big enough and strong enough to cope following him and sort of getting up there. And we first had a really good trip on chamois, and that's when the first time I ever learnt about the animal or even knew they existed was when we saw them. And we're like, you know, what are these? These things are awesome. And it sort of evolved from there. So having a really good teacher who was competent in the mountains, and then alpine hunting really took off for me when I got a job as a guide on Fox Glacier. So I did a guide season there because they take on a lot of people over the summer, and you can apply, and got picked up and learned a whole bunch of skills, and mainly confidence. So confidence on ice, confidence with crampons, ropes, and that really let me loose on the mountains. Having those skills and having access to the west coast and all the tracks when I was living down there. So that's sort of what the two aspects that have sort of got me into alpine hunting.
Nice. And what part of your life were you at when you took on the guide role?
So I was a graduate at KPMG, which is a big accounting firm, and this was right in the GFC. So it would have been about 2008, and I'd been working there, and they said, "Oh, does anyone want to take extended leave? We'll let you guys take some holiday. You can travel, take some time off." And then at that time, my younger brother Brent, who was also in the King of the Mountain film, and we do a lot of hunting together. He was actually guiding there, and I said, "Oh, how about if do you guys down there need any more guides?" And he asked the team down there, which was run by Marius Bron, and they said, "Oh, yep, we'll come down and test you out." So I went down there, and they said, "All right, well, you'll be fit enough to do the job, and you seem safe enough and responsible enough to guide a bunch of tourists on the ice." So they trained me up, and then I ended up staying there for over about 6 months, and quit my job at KPMG, and then decided to go traveling. So that sort of was a big sort of turning point in my life, is that moment actually.
Nice. So I was going to say, and it might have been the case originally, you sort of had a little bit of job security when you went down there, that you were intended to come back and they were holding a position. Was that right? Or
yeah, they were holding it open. They just obviously there wasn't enough work at that point in New Zealand, so they didn't want to let the trained people go, or the people that they'd hired go, but they were giving flexible arrangements and sort of slipped through their fingers. It was a good experience at KPMG, and after that went over to Sydney and became a corporate lawyer, and we haven't looked back. But yeah, it was good.
Nice. And so where'd you go overseas?
Sydney.
Oh, just Australia.
Yeah, so it was meant to be a pit stop on the way to London, and just the classic Kiwi trail to London, and but the New Zealand crisis happened a little bit before the rest of the world, and then in that period of time, the job market in London dried up. So, but Sydney obviously had the mining boom at that time. So Sydney, Melbourne were cranking, and I put my CV into one firm and got offered a job, and was there around 6 years later.
Nice, mate. Yeah, that was what I sort of found with Brexit, trying to go to UK and Ireland. Though it's kind of like 2 years earlier had been like, yeah, come over, just we'll have a job, and then maybe if you come over and get experience in the area, then we might have a job for you. I was like, not traveling halfway around the world for those sort of rents, and to maybe get a job. It was a bit of a shame, but yeah. And so where are you placed now with law?
So I'm still a lawyer, so I'm still in the corporate law game in a big firm in Wellington. So that's my day job, and we've been home for 3 years now. So and really loving being back in New Zealand and with family and having all this hunting. So in Sydney, and you can do the raw, or you can do a long weekend, or you might fit in a New Year's trip. So I'd always try and do some big trip, but here you can obviously, being back in New Zealand, you can go whenever you want or whenever you can when the weather's good.
Now, obviously, we spoke a few weeks back over the phone, and you said that rather than try your damnedest to try and get into that Aussie hunting environment, you just jump in the ditch. I know flying from Gold Coast to Queenstown was almost cheaper than flying from Hawke's Bay to Queenstown. How did you get on out of Sydney? Direct flight?
Yeah, that's actually probably fair. You're right. It's probably cheaper flights from Australia to New Zealand than regional. It's actually not. Sydney's not that far away, and when you want to do a big mission, you want a week, or you want to take that weekend of the week, and sandwich a week in between 2 weekends. And at the end of the day, when you're working, you've got 4 weeks annual leave anyway. And when you live in Wellington, there's not a lot of hunting immediately in Wellington, so you've got to go either, up to around Taupo or over to the Tauruas or the Aorangis. So it's still a bit of a mission to even get away. And then heading down south again, you've got to get a ferry. So it's just another leg to the journey. But yeah, in terms of trying to get into hunting in Australia, it's really hard. For example, if you want to even go to a sports shop and handle a gun in New South Wales where I lived, you needed to go through a whole permit process and have a permit to even talk about rifles and hold them. And because I was trying to buy a new rifle in New Zealand and wanted to see it in Sydney, so I made the effort to go to the sports shop. And they said, "Oh, show us your license. You're not allowed to handle guns." So, and it's a lot more restrictive over there. I know Victoria's okay, but for me to go hunting sambar in Victoria would be just as hard as coming back here. And I know where I'm going in New Zealand, so it was just an easy decision to put my efforts on coming back here, and rather than becoming a hunter in Australia, which is quite a lot of barriers to entry.
Yeah, and I guess that's what female of them over there are using bows, and just because it's less of a hassle.
That's right. Yeah. It's really hard to own a firearm in Australia.
And so, did you study in Otago or Wellington, Auckland? Where'd you study?
Yeah, Otago, and that was great for hunting. And that's when you really meet a couple of good mates who are into hunting. You've got lots of opportunity not to go to course, and take time off, and made the most of that as well. So did a lot of hunting and fed the flat with venison, and you can go to the Blue Mountains or the Catlins, or you can get to Southwestland, Fiordland, and there's really good hunting even just around Dunedin actually.
And so what was your target species down there, or just things that moved to fill the freezer?
Yeah, mainly red deer, or fallow deer. So I'd spend a lot of wasted weekends walking around the Blue Mountains. So you'd apply for a block from DOC, you'd get a little permit for a block, and you'd spend your 2 or 3 days there. And because I was a student, I could always apply for the midweek blocks. So I got to know the Blue Mountains quite well over the 5 years I was in Dunedin.
Are you allowed to camp in there in the Blue Mountains? Because I know the Te Tapui blocks near Cambridge, similar system, DOC runs the ballots, but you're not allowed to camp in there. What's it like in Blue Mountains? No,
I think it's the same. So no overnighters.
Yeah.
But the Otago deerstalkers have a big cabin. You can rent cabins really reasonably priced if you're a deerstalker.
Yeah.
So I joined the deerstalkers down there, and that was a big draw card, was their facility. So they've got really good facilities, big hall, and then you can book cabins.
Awesome, mate. And so then moving to Auckland, was that right?
Yeah, moving to Auckland, and that's when I linked up with old Ben Humphrey. And then him and I were doing crazy things. He was a lawyer at the time as well at a big law firm, before he left the big smoke and became a farmer your way. But we'd do crazy things like pack up the car, take everything get out of work early on a Friday, drive to Taupo and go seeker hunting.
Yeah.
And Lockie, who came on the hunt 2 weeks ago, also, we did a lot of seeker hunting together. So we'd mission down there, and that's really challenging to hunt seeker. And I only ever got 2 seeker from probably 12 trips at least or more. So have a lot of respect for seeker.
Right, that makes me feel better already. I've done 2 in the bush, and then obviously that morning with Ben on the back of his farm, which I've spoken about that a few times. That was a lot easier than walking around the bush, mate. That morning Ben was sort of saying that you guys might have met up, or you met up with someone through a forum. He said it was before the days of Tinder and online dating. Was that you, or was that somebody different?
So yeah, that's right. That was me. So I met a friend of Ben. So I got introduced through another friend, but the old Fish and Hunt forum.
Yeah.
So that was the mecca for New Zealand digital online hunters or keyboard warriors. And you can sit behind a keyboard and praise or criticize people at will. And yeah, there was something like there was a tab where to hunt or who to hunt or join a hunt, and I went on there and said, hey, I want to go down to the Clements Mill. Does anyone want to join?
Yeah.
And and we obviously both, I don't know, you both swipe right, and we joined up. And then we've been really good hunting mates ever since.
No, that's cool.
Thank the Fish and Hunt forum for that. I'm sure that forum will be responsible for a lot of lifelong hunting friendships, actually.
Yeah. I was speaking with Paul Michaels on Monday night, and that's what we're sort of saying about, you mentioned Clements Mill Road there, and for the Aucklanders out there going, oh, where do I go hunting? It's always, go to the Kaimais unspecified, and or Clements Mill Road, and people call it State Highway 1 on some of those forums. Don't they say, how did you sort of find getting down there? And that's what Ben said, was, oh, I never see anybody out there, but how did you sort of find that? After having so much on your doorstep and needing to jump in a car and drive a couple of hours to get anywhere.
Yeah, it was frustrating, actually, and maybe that was one of the reasons I wasn't happy living in Auckland. And I feel sorry for those guys up there, because I know there's a lot of hunters, and they have to go the longest out of anyone in New Zealand to get into good hunting. So it's but the Clements Mill Road is amazing. It just keeps delivering. The deer are really educated, and you have to be a good hunter, so you learn a lot there. But I mean, every year there's spikers and weaners, so every year there's a new batch of not that educated seeker deer in there. So you can still get them. And then most people, you got the big campsite and the couple of trailheads you can get into. But if you go back 2 hours, there's seeker deer there, and you're not far from the heartland of Poronui and up the Reap here and that. So there's some really good areas back there if you're willing to just walk with a head torch. So that's all we did, is we got on a trail, found some, you learn an area, find some leading ridges, and get there at 2 a.m. on a Friday, and you're hunting. You have a quick sleep, and then you're up stalking.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about seeker is that you're always in the hunt with them. You can hear them. They'll whistle at you, and it's just really enjoyable.
Yeah. With those ridges, was there tracks on them, or is it quite open through from there because of the deer, or is it a bit of bash?
I mean, it's there's some good ridges, and then there's some steep stuff because of the way there's lots of creeks, and it's quite volcanic. So you've got some really steep faces and steep creeks. But to be honest, I mean, you can look at the maps and figure out what the good ones are. The bush is, pretty healthy given the number of deer that you seem to bump into in there, and there's lots of little campsites, and it's so heavily hunted that you find people put little track markers up, but you'll be wise not to follow them because they cross over, or someone's done something and it takes you to a random spot that person knows about, and you just get yourself lost pretty quickly trying to follow other people's trail markers.
Yeah. And so what range is that in? Is that Kaimanawas or Ahimanawas? What are you doing?
No, isn't that in the Kaimanawas?
Kaimanawas, right? Yeah. On that, I was going to say Chris Cross was telling us that Ahimanawas was in good numbers at the moment. Not that we'll tell Doc that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think everywhere is good for hunting at the moment. It's a really good time to get into hunting and have a good chance. Actually, I think the numbers are as reasonable as they have been in the last 20 years, that's for sure. And I've noticed over my time hunting, you see, instead of just 1 or 2 deer, or the hind and the weaner, you'll see the 3 or 2 mobs or 6 deer together, or on the tops you might see a bit more, which is it's good to see. And they're generally pretty healthy deer now because the forest is still not eaten out like it used to be. So the deer are not in too bad a nick. I know there's some places in the country where the deer aren't in good condition, like Waikiri Moana and that. But places where I hunt, there's enough deer around and they're in a good enough condition.
Awesome. Good for the freezer, and hopefully, if there's good genetics amongst them, good for the wall as well. So going back to the forum, and I guess all those people on Facebook and stuff like that asking where to go. You're involved with NZDA down there in Wellington. You're the vice president and treasurer, and what do you think as an insider of NZDA now in 2019? And going into 2020, what can people sort of expect? You're involved with redoing the constitution, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So there's actually a lot of exciting things happening with the NZDA, and they're obviously representing hunters on a national level on quite a few issues now. And you've got these sort of really big high level issues, like you mentioned, the constitution, that was looked at last year. With the directive of the new managing committee, that they wanted to look at the rules, because we're, as an association, something like 80 years old. And I think the last time it was rewritten was a long time ago, and you need to modernize it. And they recognize that, as you and I are communicating on like a Zoom face-to-face meeting, like they need to be able to modernize the way they do things. And that causes some people to be upset, because a lot of people don't like change. People think you don't need to change what's worked for them. But on the same time, they're trying to be modern and meet the expectations of younger hunters and new hunters. So I think the deer stalkers, it's often criticised, but they're a humble bunch of guys, and it's run on a local level, and it's classic. People don't like to talk too much about what they've done, but when you scratch the surface and meet the people, give a little bit. And I think the thing that a lot of younger hunters make the mistake of is that they're going to rock up to a meeting, shake a few hands, and then the first thing they ask you is, "Oh, I want to go hunting. Can you take me hunting?" Or, "I want to. Can you tell me some spots?" And then when people are a bit cagey and don't tell them, and then they don't get what they want, they leave a bit upset, like they haven't had their needs met. But you got to put in a bit of time, and you're asking a lot of a hunter to just give you a spot. So you got to show up, be engaged, and then you'll meet one or two people, and that's what I think the deer stalkers is really good at on a branch level, is you can meet one or two people at your level. And then if you go to a few meetings, you'll start making friends, and people want to know you're a good hunter, you're a safe hunter. They want to probably see you on the shooting range. And I think hunting's used to be quite a hard thing to do because the numbers weren't there. All the old guys with the knowledge are hesitant to share it, so you got to sort of crack that facade. But once you're in there, everyone's great, and people will tell you all these spots, and it's a really open place. And someone like you meeting a guy like Ben in your branch, he's super generous. Like he'll help people out left, right, and centre, and take them hunting. I know he's taken a lot of guys hunting. So. And then on a national level, I mean, seeing it more as I used to be a passive. I'd call myself as a passive NZDA member. I used to go to one or two meetings. If I shot a good head that year, I'd put it in the competition. I wasn't really engaged politically and didn't really care about the future of hunting. I just wanted to go hunting. And why would I want to just sit in boring meetings when they do admin and talk about notices from DOC and where the 1080 was going to be dropped, and do we have to meet with DOC, or are we going to maintain this hut, or all that never used to interest me. But as I've sort of gotten older and more attuned and seen the issues, and then moving back to Wellington and seeing the effects of the politicians or the government of the day on the policy and the mood and the directive they give to Department of Conservation, and whether they have money for huts and money for tracks or money for 1080 or not. You can really have an influence on the committee of the deer stalkers, and the deer stalkers always has a seat at the table. So it's a long established organisation with really passionate, competent people who love hunting and love their local area. and have good relationships with the local dock people that they work with, and we can really influence things on a branch level, but also on a national level. For example, we were asked to speak at the select committee for the firearms bill the other day, and one of the few esteemed institutions asked to speak for 15 minutes, and the deerstalkers have a seat on the TAR liaison group with Doc, and really influence that process as well. And the deerstalkers, when you scratch the surface and see who's involved with the TAR Foundation or the Seeker Foundation, or it's always someone from the NZDA that's got a dual hat on. And I think that's really overlooked often by people. The guys in the deerstalkers, in my opinion, because they don't blow their own trumpet, people aren't aware what they do, and then people only complain when they're not given that hunting spot, or their trophies disqualified from a competition because it was shot out of season or shot with a spotlight, and they feel like that's unfair. But for all its warts, I think the Deerstalkers is a really good organisation, and guys like me and Ben bringing a sort of a younger face to it as well. And we realised the need to get on the boards or on the committees and be more approachable, and that was sort of the thinking behind the King of the Mountain film. Like, we came up with the concept, pitched it to the old guys, and they said, yeah, go for it, do it. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. If any of the listeners are thinking they want to get on the committee or they want to see change, you just put your hand up and get stuck in, and no one's stopping you.
Yeah. So on the King of the Mountain film, you said you sort of asked powers that be, if you will, what have they sort of felt? Has there been a bit of pride in what was made there by Cam, and have you had much feedback going forward from that?
Yeah. I mean, the process was awesome. So meeting Cam, didn't even know him. He was sort of a friend or a mate in my club, Tim Watson, who's also on the Heritage Trust with me. His brother's a filmmaker, and he said, oh, we've got this young guy who's really keen into making films, and he's getting into hunting films, and give him a call. And we literally had a couple of text messages, and then between Cam, Tim and myself, we wrote a little pitch.
Mm-hmm.
So we wrote like a little 2-page pitch and said, this is the concept, this is the shots we want to get, this is what we want to get out of it, and this is the cost. And we ran it past the board. So the Deerstalkers, one thing they is hard for them is everything has to be done by a committee. And
Yeah.
so when you have a big committee of 10 people, you've got to get a vote. And so you've got to convince people that things are a good idea, and people have different views on what's the right way to spend money. But I think the backdrop, we just had Eugenie Sage at our national conference. So she had talked about the TAR plan and her view that there were too many TAR. And we sort of saw this whole thing coming. And we said, look, we've got to get out and be proactive, do a trip, show what it's like to be on a Deerstalkers club hunt or party hunt, and also capture TAR and TAR hunting and show it in a really good light. So just hunt with your good mates and your family in the mountains, doing it free range, fair chase, also explaining about the animals, and also the need to shoot a nanny or two when you go hunting for meat as well. And so that was what we were trying to capture in the film. And I mean, Cam blew us away. Like his like, I don't know, cinematography and ideas, and the way he'd run around the hill capturing different angles. He probably walked twice what we walked. And we walked way back into the Adams Wilderness area, where you can't fly, and he carried all his camera gear. And we had a week, and the four of us, Ben, Brent, me, and Cam, just had an awesome time filming. And Brent got a good bull, and Ben got a good bull, and we saw nannies, shot some nannies, and I managed to shoot a 16-year-old nanny, and we had beautiful weather. It just couldn't have worked out better, really, for showcasing tahr hunting and promoting like the way that the NZDA conducts or should conduct yourself on a hunt, which is being a responsible hunter and thinking about your environment and enjoying it with good mates. So
Yeah.
it was just it was awesome, actually, really good.
Yeah, and so I've got both NZ Hunter and Hunter's Journal beside me, and you're in both of them. Well, how does writing fit the mold? Is it, you know, a separate passion or part of your motivation with NZDA, or just, you know, just another avenue for you? And I know you're big into reading plenty of the books as well.
Yeah, well, obviously I'm used to reading and writing as my day job. You know, the way I describe being a lawyer is you're paid to read the boring things and write the boring things that other people can't be bothered doing.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, so that's basically what you do as a lawyer, is you read every last word and think about it. And I really love, as you mentioned, I love books. So I'm a huge hunting book collector.
Mm-hmm.
And I got my first hunting book as a present at uni, I think. And I didn't even know that hunting books were a thing. And I got given one by my mate, and I was like, this is awesome. These hunting books are great. You can read a chapter or two at bed at night and go to bed thinking about hunting, and have dreams about other people's experiences. And you can shortcut a lot of learning, so you can learn about other species without having to hunt it.
Mm.
And the more you read other people's experiences, the more you can sort of learn on ways to tackle different situations. Or because hunters love hunting, but they love telling a yarn, and so the amount of hunting books is huge. And so I got into it by reading and collecting books and going to the library. I'd go to the library and get all the hunting books and read the library out, and wait for the next one. And then when I could afford books, when I wasn't a student and not getting them from the library, I just started buying them. And then I think it's just a trait of hunters, like trophy hunters and hunting. You're like collectors, like, and then you chase the better thing. And so you want a signed book, or you want the rare book. And I think it's just an extension of trophy hunting. So I think you'll be surprised about the amount of trophy hunters that are book collectors.
Yeah.
And you can sort of carry on the living the hunt through books and trying to find books. And then the writing aspect, I don't know, I just thought one day I'd write a hunt. So I mentioned earlier my uncle took us chamois hunting. And so when I shot my first chamois, I thought, I want to write about this. So I wrote it up and sent it into Rod and Rifle.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, Brendan Coe was the author and the editor, and he ran Rod and Rifle. And then I didn't hear anything, so I wrote this story, sent it in, and nothing happened. And I was like, oh, obviously they get lots of stories, and it wasn't a great story. And then Greg Dooley came out with NZ Hunter, and he used to be a writer for Rod and Rifle, and I think he sort of broke away and wanted to do his own magazine. And I got the first edition of that, and I was like, oh, and it said, we want writers, send us your story. And this must have been about 2007, and I just shot my first big tahr, so way up the Copeland. And I wrote a 2-part article for Greg about hunting tahr and red deer up the Copeland.
Mm-hmm.
And he published it. And then it was a really awkward situation because I went to the magazine shop and to pick up the copy which I knew was coming up, which was in Greg's magazine. I think it's the 2nd or 3rd edition, because he obviously wanted new writers. And then sitting next to it was the Rod and Rifle magazine, and I flicked the pages, and then my story was in my chamois story had just magically appeared in the Rod and Rifle without me even knowing it. So it was quite awkward. And then I had a conversation with Greg, and he said, "Oh, you can't write for multiple magazines. You got to pick and choose." And Greg was doing awesome stuff, and I said, "Oh, look, I'd love to keep writing for Greg." And so ever since I've been, whenever I have a good trip, I'll pen the story and send it into Greg. And I think the key thing is you got to take photos as well. So a lot of guys can they can really hunt well, they can shoot big animals, but to get in the magazines, you got to write something, take good photos, shoot something, and have the time to put it in. So it's but yeah, I've and then Cam. So Cam brought a copy of his sort of prototype hunter's journal into the King of the Mountain trip.
Yeah.
And so we were in the hut there, and he must have been carrying it around with him the whole time. And we got back off the mountain, and then he pulled this little magazine out, and he's like, "Oh, I just wanted to ask you guys what you think about this." And we were absolutely blown away. We were like, "Man, this is so classy." And we were kind of like, "Who is this guy? He's just a young man getting into the hunting scene, making videos, and then trying to publish his own awesome hunters, classy sort of different magazine coffee table thing." And so we're passing that round, and then at the end, I think I said, "Oh, do you want me to write about this trip?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, that'd be cool." So, and then I've been helping him write some pieces, and he's really happy to. So it's sort of a different angle with the Hunter's Journal. He wants more opinion pieces and more provocative, whereas for Greg or Rod and Rifle, you know, they're long established. They're not trying to set themselves apart, and they want really good adventure stories, and the editors usually do their own gear reviews, and so they just want, you know, cover photo sort of animal hunts. Whereas Cam's like, "Oh, so do you think you could write about this?" And the one you're just holding up, I wrote the rant for him, and it was just about, you know, the need for my viewers just join any club, join your local shooters club, join your local deer stalkers or SCI or Seeker Foundation, whatever you are attracted to, because I'm not saying you need to join the deer stalkers, it just suits me, but you got to join something. And then between writing that article, a whole bunch of other stuff by the guys at Point South. So Cam wrote a really good one about comparing, you know, Fish and Game versus the GAC, whereas my article was more comparing the club, so the voluntary deer stalkers, to Forest and Bird, so more of the incorporated societies versus the statutory bodies. But we're both saying the same thing effectively, is that hunters have had a free ride for a long time, and we actually need to start contributing more and having a voice. And the way you have the voice is you support those passionate people that are willing to step up and join as a GAC councillor, or, you know, get on the NZDA National Association, or run a local branch. Hunters, I think, need to realise that, you know, even though we have a free resource, things have a cost. And to maintain that free resource, we need to contribute to it. We need to be helping these organisations get ahead and have a voice, because the one thing that reading all these old books has taught me is that we're having the same arguments over and over and over again. So ever since deer were first procured and released, and they got chamois and tahr and moose, there were people that didn't want it to happen. So you can go back in the 1880s and read the old government reports in the old newspapers, and they were debating whether to bring chamois or chamois to New Zealand. And so they said, why do we want these? And at the end of the day, a lot of these decisions come down to politics and funding and budgets. And I think hunters need to realise that we can influence that by being political ourselves, or influencing the politicians. So, you know, the GAC advises the Minister of Conservation on big game hunting. We need to support the GAC so that they have the funds to get the data together, and to have the time and have the full-time paid staff to advise the minister about hunting. If there's no one there to advise her, or we haven't funded it properly, they can't do their job to the best of their ability, which is in the best interest of hunters. And then the GAC there, their role stops at advising in science and management and hopefully herds of special interest, which would be the absolute dream if we could have Wapiti and Tar and Sika as herds of special interest that are managed properly. And then you've got the clubs, which do a totally different thing. They provide gun ranges, facilities, hunts, courses, competitions, which is completely parallel. And although it relates to hunting, they satisfy a different need. And so you need both of these to be firing on all cylinders. And the way you got to do that is, you know, hunters have to put money into these organisations and membership. You know, I know you're a member of the Deer Stalkers, and you know you've probably got your own reasons for joining up and that. But I think it's fantastic that you are, and that you're bearing the fruits, because you've met Ben and had a great trip with him, and you'll meet a couple of other mates that you'll go on massive missions with and spend time in the hills. And you know, I think without these clubs, and that, it would be a sad place.
Absolutely, mate. While you're talking about the Cam Animal Council, the GAC there, and you said about getting the evidence, that's the sort of thing, with my science background, that's a real frustrating thing. And it probably speaks to you as a lawyer, that all this sort of hearsay that goes around about, you know, what's going on in different parts of the country and what's going on with the species. Like, even when it came to the tarcal, the thing that rolled me up was the margin of error of what they had estimated the tar numbers at. And I was just like, how can you base a decision to, you know, wipe out 10,000 tar when potentially that's going to take it down to sort of 7,000 or so, or maybe it's going to leave it at about 35,000 if this is your margin of error? How do you sort of feel about the hearsay aspect of it?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was easy that those numbers were not the basis for the tarcal. The tarcal was based on the Minister of Conservation's personal views and ideology.
Yeah.
And the tar numbers, or the calculations, were to support that view, and sort of put some framework around it. I mean, I'm not a scientist, so I can't tell, and I'm just a recreational hunter. But I've done a lot of tar hunting over the years in both sides of the coast, and there's a few spots where there's too many, but there's spots where there aren't many. And I find it quite hypocritical. On the one hand, we're looking at the gun law debate, which is a 1983 law, and then we're looking at the tar plan, which is also, I think, a 1983 plan. And the government's happy to criticise the historical firearms law as being old and out of date and not fit for the modern times, and using that excuse to have a go at rewriting it. Yeah, on the same side, same age, they're saying, no, the tar plan is fit for purpose. It doesn't need to change. It still works. So I think in both instances, the government is just conveniently using a line that suits their agenda. So the tar management plan was set when tar numbers were absolutely decimated in the 80s through Waro. And that was set at a number so that there was a minimum level for recreational hunters. So the NZDA had a massive hand in putting that plan together. One of our branch members actually was in the Forest Service at the time and wrote that plan. And one of the interesting things he says is people were so upset that there was a tar on the front of the document, and he fought to have it recognised and put a picture of the animal, because certain people don't want any tar, but an equivalent amount of other people do want the tar, and both of them are okay to hold their views. In my views, you don't need to love tar, you don't need to hate tar. We've got them, we need to manage them. Is 10,000 the right number? Probably not. It was probably just a number that was agreed to at the time because it was more than there was actually on the ground. And people thought, well, 10,000 sounds like a good number. It's a huge area. Whereas now we realise there's too many tar in some spots and there's not many in others. We've had a massive tenure review process where high country farm has reverted back to a DOC estate. So that's highly productive land that there holds a lot of tar in those areas, and that wasn't part of the national estate when that plan was written. And they've got to manage a whole huge area of New Zealand now, and keep tar under control. And I think the only way they're going to do it sensibly is with hunters. And so they need to listen to hunters so that we work with them in the long term.
Yeah.
And throwing around a 1983 report as a justification for slaughtering a massive game resource is, I think, just convenience to back up, as I say, the ideology.
Yeah. And so while we're on there listening to hunters, you were at the Seeker show with the NZDA Museum, Heritage Museum and Heritage Trust. And they had the tar kill recording app. Is that functional yet? You know, were you able to log the tar from the weekend on that, or still a prototype?
No, I think it is. I think they have rolled it out. I mean, I talked to them there. It's probably pretty low key. They haven't rolled it out too much, but I'd say it's on their website. I haven't checked. They were going to go live with it. And all it was a very simple app to turn on your GPS on your smartphone, allow it to access the data, take a photo, and then tell what it was you shot.
Yeah.
And then they'll record it, and then that was their verifiable way that recreational hunters could contribute to the animal count.
Yeah.
So a lot of the outrage this year was that all the recreational hunters, or NZDA culls, or any SCI culls, or anything that was organised that wasn't through DOC wasn't counted towards the 10,000.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people probably need to realise is there were far more than 10,000 tar killed this year. I know a lot of people probably thought, I'll do my bit, and got stuck in, and it wouldn't surprise me if double that was actually shot by people thinking they were doing the right thing. And probably at the moment I didn't shoot nannies on the last 2 trips.
Yep.
And that's just a decision I made because I just want to see where the dust settles. I'm not saying people shouldn't shoot a nanny or 2, but I'd be hesitant to have a big bomb up because we just don't know where this resource is going to go. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 3 years in terms of their strategy.
Yeah, and there was when I talked to Cam in the last episode, he was sort of a little bit unsure of that, what's to happen. But if anyone's sort of wanting to sort of get a management idea out there, Joseph Peter from Hard Yards Hunting had a really good conversation with Kieran Island on the Educated Hunter, and that was exactly what they were saying. They were saying if Doc's out there killing all the nannies and young bulls, in 10 years' time, what are we going to have left on the ground? So it's got to be all about age and shoot the odd meat animal, but don't necessarily go out there and have a bomb up, because we've already got Doc and the likes doing controlled kills, and that's what they're targeting, and they're already doing the bomb ups. So maybe it is about what do you want out of the herd, what do you want out of a trophy, and where's your benchmark, and try and improve on that, especially if your benchmark's quite low at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. I think it would be irresponsible not to wait and see. I think we just need to wait and see. We need to hopefully have a good discussion through the TAR liaison group and the likes of the TAR Foundation, the Game Animal Council, and NZDA. And it's TAR need to be managed for the next 100 years. And there's a lot of hunters that value tar, a lot of international hunters that value tar, and I think DOC are understanding that now. But it's going to take a big coordinated approach and a lot of pressure from hunters.
Yeah.
So I think hunters need to not let up, and we need to keep reminding the Department of Conservation that we value tar, and we want reasonable numbers, and it just needs to be compatible with the environment, right? So if a valley can have 100 tar in it, and it's in a good, healthy state, it should have 100 tar in it, in my view. But if a valley's been eaten out, then we should give that valley a rest. It's just like anything, you manage it properly to get the outcomes you want.
Mm. Yeah, and I guess that's kind of going back to your point about funding and the science and ecology and getting the right people on the job. That again is why we should be joining one of these groups, so that the right questions can be asked and the right measurements can be made. So then we have an idea of what is, right in terms of what the outcome is that is desired. And there's plenty of people saying that addressing the numbers doesn't actually address the outcome. If the outcome is, well, we want these species of plant and tree and shrub and understory growing, well then let's measure if they're there or not. As you say, if the catchment can handle it, well then, and those are there, grazing animals often improve on that. And there's been the argument out there that before the tahr and before humans there was grazing birds, that spread the seed and help the plant to grow again. So if that's what we're targeting for, that's where we need to. Well, I don't know if that's right either. I don't know much about ecology either, but if that's the plan, well, let's get a direction towards that.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's a good resource at the moment, and let's just hope common sense prevails in this debate and we have a good resource that's managed. I mean, the Fiordland Wapiti model is the ideal model that they should roll out. I mean, we've got the tahr ballot. The tahr ballot could be, managed in a way that it self-sustains tahr management. And at the moment, I think, because it's the first time I actually just won a ballot. Yesterday they drew the tahr ballot for next year, and I drew a block. And it's the first time since I've been applying that I've drawn, and it's getting more and more popular. And I think it's only going to increase. And I think if they put that fee to a reasonable level, and give the money to a competent helicopter operator, not just the lowest tenderer, and someone that really knows what they're doing, then that, like the way that they do in the Fiordland for the Wapiti, and allow the guys that are running it, so the Tahr Foundation guys, to choose the chopper pilot and communicate to the hunters on where it needs to be managed. I think that's what I'd like to see personally.
Yeah, and I think also going back to the Wapiti model, having that meeting before each period to communicate with what's been happening in each catchment and what to expect, and what they sort of think a takeable trophy is. You really create that expectation of what you're going to go in for, and also expectation of, well, that's what I want to get, sort of thing. Create the narrative around, well, what is a true trophy? What am I really looking for? You see that communicated on NZ Hunter and Red Stag Timber Hunters Club and stuff. That those meetings with Roy are all about, what's the ideal big picture here. And yeah, I think that would be another thing that would take it seriously, and two, raise the status of the Tahr Foundation, which has been really put to the fore of late with what happened last year. It's pretty cool, pretty exciting. Yeah,
that's right.
And going back to the reading the books thing, I just sort of finished reading Ray Tinsley's Call of the Wapiti, and it was funny you said about we're having the same conversations. I had the exact same thought. And the first book I read was one by Rex Forrester. It's a green cover. I've actually given both these away, and I need to get them back. What was the first book that you read, and first author that you read?
I think it was the ones that were coming out when I was the Max Curtis one, and I think it's Beneath the Mountain Mist or something like that. So the Curtis, there were three Curtis brothers, and one of them was in the Forest Service as a colour, and then he was, in the era with the Percy Lies and Hunting the Whitcomb, and that book there really inspired me, like reading about what they did and the hardships they went through. And then Pack a Rifle by Holden is another one, really well written book that paints a picture in your eye of these guys living the rugged life in the hills. And then those ones sort of romanticized hunting, and you sort of read about these big famous valleys, and it plants the seed to, you want to go there. Like, you read about it, and then as you become more involved in the hunting scene, you hear of these valleys, and you hear someone's been there, and so those books are really influential. And then the ones I've liked in recent times are the Banwell books. So obviously Bruce Banwell was a deer expert, and he wrote and collated a lot of the record books, like New Zealand, the Great New Zealand Deer Heads, and the record book series on all the species. And so I'm a details person, and I love reading all the stats and looking at all the heads, and learning about where the heads are and the different regions. And you've got the Otago and the Rakaia, and Mount White and Nelson heads, and the different chamois. And I really study those books, and if you look in the records, people have to put the range or the valley where they shot their head, so you can get a lot of data if you think about it, and try and figure out where these big heads are shot, where you can get a certain type of head. Is this area good for chamois or not good for chamois? Has it got good bases? Where are the good tar coming out of? You can get so much knowledge from books that would take you a lifetime to accumulate by experiences. I really love books. And then my treasured books are the old ones, the really old ones. So the Don one, the T.E. Don, who brought tar and chamois and wapiti and that to New Zealand. So he wrote a couple of books, Red Deer Stalking in New Zealand and the Acclimatization of big game animals in New Zealand. Awesome. And then one by Forbes and Wilson as well. So I don't know, you're probably aware there was a big exhibition in the UK, the Wembley exhibition in the 1920s. And at that time they shipped the very best heads shot in New Zealand. There was a big Dominion exhibition. So the British Empire wanted to show its power and wealth, and they invited all of the Commonwealth countries to come and have a stand back in the UK to showcase to the world, to the rest of Europe, its might. And New Zealand shipped back, a whole bunch about agriculture and fishing and sport fishing, trout, salmon. And the main feature, or one of the standout features on the whole exhibition, was the New Zealand hall with all the deer heads. Mm-hmm. So we were sending over, 15, 16, 20 pointers, 40 inches by 40 inches. And that was all photographed, beautifully photographed and presented in this book. And there's only, I think, 400 copies.
Wow.
And I managed to find one of those, and, it's just an awesome old book. And you can actually get that for free now. So it's gone off copyright, and the New Zealand National Library, if you go and search Forbes New Zealand Deer Heads, you can get a digital copy and have a look.
Okay. You were saying about that Expo and that green cover. Now, it might have actually been Holden, not Forrester, that wrote that book. And I read that book when we had a good 24 hours or so in a tent up the top of the Blue River.
Nice.
Hunting there, and the stories and stuff going into the Hastings Club for the first time. Sure enough, they've got this gigantic head on the wall that's from the Blue River, and I wrote about a trip for that in my own blog, and I just, as soon as I saw that photo, I put it up. I put it up on my Instagram and said, "Man, I wish we'd come across one of these up there." It had a good dose of Wairo, that basin, but we'll still, and I still am an amateur hunter, and so we got a bit scared by those glacial steep basins that are in there, and didn't bother climbing up in the 24 hours in the tent, and only to wake up and go have a look at the basin and get put up by a couple of paradise ducks. We just disheartenedly walked the 18 k's out that day. That was us.
Oh, that's a typical trip. We've all done lots of those. If you like those old heads, have you ever heard of the book My Stalking Memories by Major Wilson?
No, sounds cool.
So get a hold of that, and that's probably one of my top 5 all-time books, actually. He was a gentleman hunter at that time, and he used to book trips back to those valleys. I think he hunts the Blue, and he hunts all those famous valleys, and he shoots some beautiful heads, and it's all in this book, which is really ahead of its time. So I think it was published in the 60s, and he wrote about his trips between the wars, so between World War One and World War Two. He did that's when all the good stalking was, and then it was after the war when there was good stalking on the fringe countries, because obviously all the hunters and all the gentlemen were off at war. But he writes a really good book about his stalking memories, and he'd take his wife. They'd do those massive pack camps, have horses and cooks, and he'd take his wife, and it's a really good book, that one.
Epic, mate. While we're in the history with science, it's all about where things have come from, and the same with law. You guys do that law history. All goes back to the UK. And now you're involved with the Heritage Trust, and talk us through what the Heritage Trust is about, and this museum, and where the funding's coming from, and what the aim is going forward with that awesome, what's going to be an awesome building.
Yeah. So as part of moving home and joining the Wellington Deerstalkers, a couple of the guys on the Wellington branch are part of it's the NZDA National Heritage Trust. So it's a registered charity, sort of separate to the NZDA itself, although it shares the name and shares the people. It's a trust board, so there's 6 trustees, and they're all older guys. So we've got Albie Frampton, who was an ex-president of the Deerstalkers. He's a Wellingtonian. Mark Donarchik, who is the patron of the Deerstalkers, and a long time Wellington Branch Deerstalker, and I took over the treasurer's role from him when he stepped down. And he's an awesome guy. He's the one funding the new children's hospital in Wellington. So he's a big-time deerstalker and long-time NZDA man. And then we've got Tim Watson, who's the other young guy on the Heritage Trust. So all the guys are in their, I don't know, there's some 80s, mid-80s, and then me, mid-30s, and Tim, late 30s. And then we've got Barry Insall. He's a great guy. And then we've got John Riley, the librarian. He's a member of the Hut Branch. His wife, long-suffering wife, and lovely volunteer Dulcie, she comes and helps us as well. And so, and then our chair is Bob Badland. So he was one of the founders of it. And it was started in 2000 by a bunch of old deerstalkers, so like Hong Tees and guys like that who are big names in the deerstalkers, and they saw like a whole lot of stuff going missing. So the deerstalkers had a lot of treasures, and you move offices or you change executive boards, and people get given gifts, and people move on and move around, or things go missing. And they thought, we've got to keep all this together. And so they thought, we'll establish this museum trust as a separate entity with the sole purpose of curating all the treasures, and then starting to accumulate them and then keep the records. So one of the key aspects of the Deerstalkers is it's got a long memory. It's fought every single battle ever fought in New Zealand to do with hunting. And it was formed off the back of red deer being shot by the government and deemed a menace, so the deer menace, back in the 30s. And so they've been sort of banding and representing hunters ever since. And so that's sort of the background to the trust and where we are today. So I got involved a couple of years ago and saw the awesome stuff they were doing through Tim. So Tim got involved similarly to me. His dad bought at auction Viv Donald's 280 Ross. So the 280 Ross straight pull rifle, which shot the first wapiti in New Zealand. So he was at a gun auction and bid on this and picked it up for not very much money, kind of knew the history and knew the importance, and then took it to the trust or to the Deerstalkers, and they said, oh look, I've got this rifle, you guys would be interested in this, can you tell me a bit about it? And then he got sucked into it. And then when I got back, Tim said I'd just done a massive trip around Europe and visited all the hunting museums over there. And I was talking to Tim about it, and he's like, oh, you're into all the old stuff, come and meet the Heritage Trust guys. And they meet on a Friday. And then it just one thing led to another, and again it was the book. So John Riley loved books, and we were just comparing notes on old books, and he was showing me, oh, we've got this copy and this, and I was just blown away with what they had. And then they have things like all the old photo albums. So everyone's heard of Forbes and seen his beautiful photos. Well, they've got his photo albums, and I mentioned Major Wilson, they've got his photo albums, and the Herrick photo albums, the moose, and all these old deer stalkers, when they sort of pass on, their families tend to donate their collections. Yeah. So as I mentioned, you know, old hunters and trophy hunters are often collectors. So they'll collect different things. And then the families often don't share that same passion that hunters have for hunting things. And
you said long-suffering partners.
yeah, there's a lot of long-suffering partners that pretty quickly box things up and ship it to the deer stalkers. And that's happening more and more now, and we're getting more and more amazing things. And Mark Donarchik, who is a very astute property developer, saw the building. So he's always got his ear to the ground on what's happening around Wellington. And this old villa right next to Parliament came up. And I wasn't around then, it was before my time, but he pitched it to the NZDA National Conference that we should be pulling our funds and buying this building. They passed it at conference, and conference said, yeah, right, go ahead, we want our own office, because they were renting an office and they were having to move out. And they got the money together through a combination of donations, Wellington Branch investment money, the New Zealand Deerstalkers Capital Fund, so members' investment money, and the Heritage Trust. And they had this old building, but then once you buy it, they just sort of moved in and were just using it as it was. Then I came along, and a little bit of background in law and funding and grants, and I thought, look, there's got to be a way you can get money to put into this.
Yeah.
And I came up with an idea, wrote a paper, pitched it to the club and said, hey guys, we should really be helping the museum with our money, because the Wellington Branch has got some good investments and some really smart people. Let's help these guys and put a deal together. And then did the same at the national level. So did a lot of talking and convincing people it was a good idea. And then said, all right, we figured out the criteria. So I applied for a lotteries grant. So there's a whole big grants process you go through. You got to write big reports. You know, you got to take a risk. You got to get building consents and resource consents, concept plans. We had to engage a feasibility study team. So we had to lay out $25,000 for a report, for a professional report, studying the hunting museum scene of New Zealand, and they decided whether it was had a business plan, whether it was going to be financially viable, whether it was a good idea, whether it was met by another need. And that report came out favourable and said, look, we think this is a great location, great concept, should have the support. And then we pulled all this together. And then I went around and over 6 months got a whole bunch of letters of support. And so I was writing left, right, and centre, sending emails off to every single hunting foundation, all the hunting magazines, different personalities, organisations, having meetings with the heritage arm of DOC, meeting with Te Papa, other museums, meeting with Wellington Council, police, all these different people, getting letters of support and recommendation. I think I got something like 40 supporting letters, because you've got to build a business case, because it's a competitive fund. So we're competing against everyone else for lotto money. And we had great feedback, and everyone absolutely loved the idea, and everyone's like, this is long overdue. It's such a big part of New Zealand's culture and heritage that it's just not represented in, the museum scene in New Zealand, and it's even, not properly represented in the museums we have.
Mm-hmm.
So in my view, hunting sort of pushed to the side, and even though a lot of people value hunting and are hunters, it's not given, it's sort of a little bit niche and underground, and it's not in the public space. And this is just going to be an awesome public building where we can showcase hunting, keep the history, keep getting all these old items and photo albums and old home movies and the big trophies, and curate it under one roof. And so we basically wrote this thing and did a persuasive application, and then submitted it, spent all this money, about, I think, $40,000-$50,000 of Wellington Branch funding support to back my vision and say, look, we can do it. And then, we got a call a few months later, and it said, you have been awarded a grant, go ahead and do it. And so then I had the next problem was I had the QS that said we needed about $1.8 million to build this thing. I had $500,000 from Lotto as sort of the cornerstone funding, and then I needed to convince the Deerstalkers Association to put some money in. I needed to convince the Heritage Trust guys to put all of their money in. So I had to convince the trustees that this thing was good, that we should put all the money that we've made and donated and that they'd saved up over decades of, doing little bits and getting $1 here and $1 there. And then convincing the Wellington branch at an AGM that we should put our money and all of our financial might behind it. And anyway, it all came together, and we're now, the foundations are laid, the block work's going up, and it's a fully funded project that'll be finished mid-2020, so June, July next year.
Awesome, man. That's pretty exciting. You brought up the fact that you went along to, we got a letter of recommendation from the Dock Heritage Trust, and that's where, there's a lot of history between Deerstalkers and Dock and that sort of stuff. What was it like getting that letter, and what should people know about that letter of recommendation from Dock?
That letter, I mean, it's obviously, so they have a historic or a curated arm. So they have historic huts, historic sites, and they have their own archives. So, and they see the value in what we do. I mean, the Deerstalkers and hunters built most of those huts, and they realise that we've got these game animals, and it's part of our conservation story. It's part of our heritage, and there's a huge crossover between people who worked for New Zealand Forest Service back in the day and now Dock. And even though on a political level or on a very ideological level, there's certain people in Dock that are really anti-introduced animals, there's still everyday people that still hunt and still value these animals, despite the tension. And it was really easy. We had them round, they looked at the building, and we told them our vision, and they were like, well, how can you not support this? You're promoting the hunting part of Department of Conservation. So people forget that part of their job is to manage game animals for hunters. So it's Department of Conservation, but it really should be Department of Conservation and Recreation, because they're there to give, when you actually read their act, the Conservation Act, it talks about access to hunting. Every decision they need to make, they need to think about the impact on hunting, and our treasured access to all of that. And Dock is viewed in one light, but they're actually they're people too, and they realise the value in these things. So I mean, they were really supportive, and the letter's not gushing. It's not, but it's it's like we do. It's like, this is a good thing. There's recognised heritage here, and it's a good thing that this is being preserved properly for all of New Zealanders. So
No, that's cool.
they were good.
when you're talking about the herds of special interest, you didn't mention your favourite species, the chamois.
Mm.
Do you see a place, or just the range is just, they're just there and they're across it?
I think because chamois are from Fiordland to Kaikoura and from east coast to west coast and everywhere, they probably aren't going to need to be managed in the same way. They don't have the same habits that deer and tahr seem to, and they don't seem to aggregate in big mobs. They don't eat out in area, so they're not going to cause so much, so many problems for the native, vegetation. So I think, although I'd love to see a chamois foundation or a chamois foundation and a herd of, you're managing a vast area.
Mm.
It's a bit like they probably won't have to have a herd of special interest for red deer, and as a whole, they might have one for a special herd or a, people will probably like to see, some of the herds protected, like some hotspots for Otago bloodlines and Rakaia bloodlines and that. But I think chamois would probably be all right on their own.
Mm. Yeah. I was having the discussion with Cam about Cam Mackay, not Cam Henderson, from Point South, about, are we right in saying there's a female chamois in the record books and she's bloody long? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think the female is the number one for length.
Right, that's what.
So it's absolutely huge. I think it's 13, in the 13-inch long kind of class. So it's just got huge hooks, and they're a little bit unusual because there's some horn rot. So the horn rot's made them turn out, and it's just it's a big old nanny.
Awesome. So you said about being up the tops in Nelson and coming across one and not even knowing what it was. I was, to some extent, a bit the same. We visited Hermitage, and that's when I first saw tahr and chamois and just was blown away, and a bit like you, didn't realise that these things were actually running around that area. And now the more and more I see, I sort of made up just the side of the Ben O'Hell creek or river, whatever you want to call it, yesterday, and just how close they are to those lakes. What going into the history of it and looking at what sort of goes on in Europe. Greg Dooley had an awesome episode where he was over with the Swarovski guys looking at chamois in Austria. Was he? Knowing the history of that animal, can you also tell us how they ended up here?
Yeah, well, I've been over there. I was in the next valley from where I think Willie was, and that was out of Austria. So I did a big drive. So I went over and visited the Italian side in the Dolomites, saw them there, went through to Austria and out of Salzburg, where they think they came. There's a mountain range up there where Franz Joseph got his foresters. So they got all the local alpine people to basically herd the chamois into nets. So it's an interesting story, and there's a little paper that I can send you, written by an Austrian, and he was a Kiwi at the time, but he wrote it in German and in English, and it's called the chamois, or the chamois. Over there they're called gams or gemsen, and hunting them is die gams, so hunt gams. And there was a German warship that visited New Zealand before World War One. So when Franz Joseph was emperor, and he was a big chamois man, he sent a ship called the Panther to New Zealand, and it refueled in Wellington and got stores on its way around, circumnavigating wherever it was on its way to. And the government hosted the captain of the ship, and that guy T. Don, who I mentioned, spoke to him and said, look, I'd really like to, I'm in the process of procuring a whole bunch of game animals. Is there any chance that we can have chamois? And obviously wined and dined him and said, look, if you can get chamois, we can send you mountain parrots, so keas and tuataras and ferns. And so that was a time when everyone was learning and, great exploration around the world, and people were into natural history museums and they wanted to put exotic animals in their zoos.
Mm-hmm.
And so it transpired that he thought he could pitch the idea to Franz Joseph. And so when he got back to Vienna, he said, look, New Zealand wants to do this swap. Will you get some chamois? They think they've got the Southern Alps, which will be perfect environment for them. And he said, yes, I'll get them. So he ordered his hunters to go and get all these chamois. And apparently, according to some accounts, that they pushed like hundreds of these things. So they got all the villagers to basically walk a mountain range and got nets set up and caught all these animals, and a whole bunch died, ran off cliffs and everything. And I think apparently it didn't go down too well with the locals. But he caught a whole bunch of young ones, and then took them back to his palace in Vienna, like Schönbrunn Palace, and then tamed them. So hand reared the young ones and tamed them, and then crated them and shipped them to New Zealand. So I think they got here in 2 batches. So he sent one batch with some bucks and a few does, and then he got a few more and sent them as a secondary release. So there's sort of 2 releases a couple of years apart. And they were released at the Hermitage. So where you were was like ground zero with chamois.
Yeah. No, it's pretty. Yeah, I still remember. I think that must have been how I started to get interested in hunting, being exposed to the walls of that amazing hotel and at the base of Mount Cook there. It's an amazing place if you're ever travelling around and you sort of going past Lake Pukaki, take a right and drive up there, because one the vista of Mount Cook's even better, but 2, just go into that hotel and have a look around the lobby, because there's some amazing stuff going on in there as well.
Oh, it's an awesome part of New Zealand there, and you can see why they thought that the chamois would do well, and it's perfect for them. New Zealand's proved to be perfect for them to live in. I mean, by all accounts, they're not as big as they are back in Europe. So either the animals, the particular animals that we were gifted, might have been smaller in stature. You might have got the smaller genes, or it could be environment. You don't know. It might not have the best alpine grasses and that, because I know over there from seeing it, you have the big pastures up there where they have the cows with the bells, and it's a lot higher in altitude, and just a different sort of environment. So I think maybe it could be the food that's not as good here, or minerals or something. But and then the tahr were released not far away from the chamois, and they came via England though. So
yeah,
they were a gift from I think it was Lord Bedford, and I think he sent over Sika and a few other things and sent them over, and they were he had procured them from the Himalayas from India for his game park in England, and then he happened to have them, and he just ended up and say, oh, you have some of these on, or crate them up and send them over to you.
Was that Woburn that was that
Yeah,
him?
I think that's right. Yeah. I'm not too sure on the exact, but I think it's Lord Bedford who sent those over, and as a gift as well.
Mate, when you were at the Sika show, you had the Nits trophy there. What was the conversation like around that? Seeing something from yesteryear. What is it? 58. I've got it written down here. 58 inches long, 50 and a half wide, 17 points, 474 3/4 Douglas score. As the largest public land stag done by Les Brown Taxidermy Master, and then there's a 60-inch cast that you had there. How was the yarns or jaw dropping going on seeing that thing?
Yeah, that's a massive draw card, isn't it? I mean, the thing is just absolutely huge, and it's just incredible that an animal can grow that in a summer, effectively, spring and summer, and carry it around field and bush. Like, having been through the bush in that part of the world, it's the thing's going to be catching on everything, and it's just at the moment it's just stuck in the NZDA office and no one can really see it, and that's the great thing about this museum that we're going to build is that people can come and see these things with their own eyes and just look at how much bone is growing on those pure wapiti that we used to have in Fiordland. And that 60-inch cast antler is, you know, like, no joke. You look at your forearm and that's how thick it is.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, it's the mass on those wapiti antlers back in the day. It's just incredible. You know, and they were bigger than anything shot in America in their homeland at the time. I think they get bigger ones these days, but I think there's a bit of, you know, management going on. But the heads, I think we've got 3 massive wapiti in the Heritage Trust, all top 10 wapiti. And unfortunately, the Halberg head just burnt down in the marae, which was a real tragedy of that getting burnt down. We were in discussions with them to hopefully have that on display. And, you know, if anyone's listening and they know of old heads, you know, let us know as well. We're always keen to display heads, and we really want to make this like a world-class museum where you can come and just see the best of the best. So
yeah,
you have to come and see it, mate, because it's just incredible.
Yeah, I've got a couple on my list now. We had friends come who'd been down to the Deer Museum in Wanaka and just going through the bloodlines of the farm deer and a lot of wapiti in that museum as well. And you know, he's a keen hunter from Australia, and he's got excited about that. And we had the 2 magazines here, and I said, "Oh, look at this! There's going to be a hunting museum in Wellington." And he was had to sort of wipe the drool up, eh, mate? It's pretty bloody awesome. Yeah. And so, how did Nitz go about hunting there? Was that sort of something that he, you know, got someone to guide him through? It must have been a hell of a job to claim that you could guide fieldland.
Yeah, I think the Nitz brothers were not usual. So I think they did it like, so I would say these guys like DIY, self-guided.
Yeah.
So a lot of the guys back in that time were using, you know, the famous guides.
Yeah,
you know, the Moores and Hodgkinsons and
Sutherland,
you know, those kinds of, those guys were
Morale,
you know,
that's another one.
Morale, they were all guides, and they were like the local hard men down there, like, you know, shepherds.
I think I'm even related to the Morales, actually.
Yeah. Oh, we got good stalking DNA then.
Oh God.
I think one of the most famous ones was Bell. One of the guides was Bell, and he was famous for he could score a head on the hoof.
Oh, nice.
So he would be like, "Oh, that one's 50 inches," or that's, you know, like, "Nah, it's not a shooter. It's only 38 by, you know, 36. It's not a 50-inch head," or whatever. But yeah, the Nitz brothers, they were brothers, and they would just do it themselves. So they drew a tag, and I think back in the day, like £5 was an absolute fortune for a tag. And
there's only a few. There's only a few tag days.
Yeah. And you got the really famous people like the Herricks and the Wilsons, and you know, those guys at that time were guided in. But they did it the hard way and got into these bulls themselves. I think they did it over 2 seasons, so they went back a couple of times and got some, you know, huge heads and dragged them out. And, you know, I just couldn't imagine carrying out 60-inch heads through that bush. It's just, you know, we all do it with helicopters these days, and it's just the way that they did it with their gear. Like, they were wearing, you know, woolen and canvas, and they had to like find a camp, light a fire, and, you know, pitch the billy. Like, we just flick on a jet boil, put out our synthetic tents, and, you know, we basically do it super comfy. Whereas, you know, they just had a gun, some food, all their gear, and a little pup tent, and, you know, they put any modern hunter to shame, I think.
Yeah, that Call of the Wapiti, Ray Tinsley nearly killed himself many times in that book. Just like exposure, or he nearly fell down a scree slope, and then I think he said where he stopped, he was in the dark as well, and where he stopped was basically a 100-meter fall. You know, and so he went back over the saddle, and camped up on the side and got belted with snow and rain, which can happen out there. How many times have you been into the Wapiti zone?
I've been into film a few times. I had a ballot this year actually. I was in the Charles block, which is right on the southern end of the herd, and they manage that quite a lot. So they shoot a lot of animals out of there to keep the numbers down and to maintain a buffer zone. So our party, I didn't pull the trigger. The guy John I was hunting with didn't. I think one stag with my brother and his mate Elliot got a big old sort of red type animal, which was in the big 11 pointer. But no, our block was pretty tough going. And then a few years ago, I was at one of the core blocks, which was where Tinsley, in the Tinsley Highway up there, which was the Cat's Eye, the old George. So that's on the peninsula where you got the Steena Burn and the Cat's Eye, and then you've got Bulls Creek over the side. Yeah, my brother shot a really good wapiti up there, and I shot an 11 back then. And it's just tough country. Like, I know some guys absolutely love wapiti hunting, but I find it, once every few years is enough. You need to have enough time to forget how hard it was.
Yeah.
To think, oh, now's a good time to try and apply for a ballot. But I've applied for ballots, but I just don't draw. I'm a very unlucky drawer. Like I said, I've been applying for TARB ballots for years, and I only just drew one now. And it's, all these ballots are getting more and more harder and harder to draw. Actually, it's not good for a humble hunter from Wellington to get a ballot.
Yeah, going back to the Aussies, there's plenty of them. I saw putting up photos of them applying, so good on them. And be interesting to see the numbers of internationals that got into that ballot, eh?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that I think that they can sort of get educated by YouTube now. Like, you can learn a lot about how to hunt New Zealand, and a good rifle can make up a lot for a bad hunter. And so some of the gear these days, like, you can get yourself a $4,000 scope and a big long gun and make yourself a better hunter. But I think, a lot of these guys probably come over and find it real tough going, at least for the first time. Yeah. So I think, they just probably don't have the right gear or, the right experience or skills to tackle some of those Landsborough West Coast blocks, because it's not the East Coast.
Nah. Well, that's what I was quite impressed with Brian Cole when he was even on the East Coast. And as we've spoken about, he had a bit of information, and even he was, up on the top there. The guy I was with, his name escapes me right now. Was constantly saying through the camera to his wife, we've got life insurance and stuff like that. Yeah. And as you say, it's Landsborough and stuff's not the East Coast. So
I know. And maybe those guys take more risks than Kiwis, because we can just come back. But they're like, oh, this is the trip of my lifetime. I've got to take a risk, and they get unstuck. Like, we're always rescuing foreign hunters, it seems, or they're falling off the hill or trying to cross a river and drowning. It's a bit of a problem. But I mean, what can you do? It's, at the moment, you can do what you like in New Zealand. You can go anywhere you want. I think it'll be, if this arms bill passes, it's going to be a lot harder for them to get firearms. So they might have to come and bow hunt tahr, and then they'll get a lot of respect if they can bow hunt a bull tahr.
Of any like you say, that'd be a trophy in itself to do that. But then to get to those status bulls, that'd be incredible.
Yeah. So I think a lot of international hunters are going to be worried about how this firearms law is going to play out. I think the guides will be happy, because the guides will have to be. You have to engage a guide to basically get a firearm, and you need a pretty good firearm to get a good bull. So.
And that was sort of the question that I raised after talking to Brian, was like, well, he wasn't doing anything wrong at all, and full power to him that he came all this way and did it and got the information he needed and went out there and was successful. But then it was kind of like, well, what happens to our guiding industry if these guys just come here and do it on their own, with that potential risk that they get into trouble because they might one, don't know the country, and two, might push a little bit harder because they're not coming back. And that was my question. Well, what do we do about it when there's no protection to the species or anything like that? There's no value based on the species or anything like that. What do the guides do? What are they selling? And maybe that might be one of the positives that come out of this firearms law, is that if someone's coming here to hunt internationally, they're going to need to engage that service, as well as get into fantastic areas with fantastic knowledge and make the right choice, and what they select actually is worthwhile taking home.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard one. I mean, I would like, I'm sort of a libertarian, so I don't like restrictions, and but I'm also safety conscious, and you got to maybe education is the way to do it. Maybe make them sit some sort of skills course, or do some online training to say this isn't just out the back. I mean, I'd hate to see over-regulation. I think people think rules can solve anything at the moment. This is what this government seems to think, is just layer on another rule, but it doesn't sort of change what's going to happen on the ground, does it? Like, you can put a rule in place, but it doesn't mean anything. And I don't know, it's a tough one. I mean, I've hunted in America, and I got tags and went to Wyoming and did it myself, DIY, and that was awesome. And I would hate to see that taken away from me, or having to hire a guide over there for $10,000 for a hunt, and then all of a sudden, instead of couple of $1,000s, it's super expensive, and you're into the 15,000-20,000 New Zealand dollars to hunt over there. So I mean, I can see the argument on the one side, but I'd also hate to see it all over regulated. I'm happy for Aussie hunters to come, or European, or the Dutch and the Danish and Scandinavians and the Swiss. You always see that those are the guys you actually meet in the backcountry. You don't meet many Kiwis, and they're all reasonably competent. And Brian and their hunt, I've seen that he's put a video out, and I haven't actually watched it, but I mean, well done on them for getting the information, getting into a good spot, and getting something, because that's a big achievement, I think, to get a tar and a chamois without having the benefit of any experience in that kind of country. They did really well, and anyone that wants to do that, I'll support them getting out and hunting. The less barriers to hunting, the better, and smarter people than me will come up with the answer. I mean, hopefully that's what the GAC is there to do, and they represent guiding New Zealand, and Guides New Zealand should have some input. But to make every international hunter have a guide, I think is probably the wrong approach. But that's just my view.
Yeah, and that's what I've always said as well. I could probably do with a guide, but
I'd love a guide.
Yeah, my choice is to try and figure this bloody thing out for myself, which I do a lot with. End up banging my head against the wall and falling over and that sort of stuff. But that's what makes you stronger. They say.
Exactly.
On the legislation stuff, how did you think the response was to presenting at the arms bill hearings? I started watching that long video. I think Joseph Peter put it up the other day. It was 5 hours long. Yeah. How did you feel? How was your experience?
Look, it's interesting. It's the first time I've actually, other than voting during an election, participated in democracy. So, as a lawyer, I always read the laws, or make sure that the person I'm advising is complying with the laws. And, we normally think of things as quite black and white, but then going into the process of making a law in response to like a tragedy, and in my view, it's a really bad law, because coming from having trained as a lawyer and gone to law school, you learn about the fundamentals of what our English law system is, what our constitutional framework is, what the rights we have are. When you think about it, New Zealand's at the end of a long chain of legal history and civil wars and international wars. When you put it into context, like it goes back to the Magna Carta in 1066, when the the people of England rose up and put in some basic rights to stop the state and the police having so much power over individuals. They could go in at any time and arrest you or detain you, and you're subject to the whim of the people in charge. And to bring it forward 1,000 years, where we are now, and post World War II, when the concept of the Bill of Rights came into play, the civil wars that they had in America to protect basic rights and liberties. Literally, people have died and laid down their lives to protect basic fundamental rights of the individual. And it kind of really upset me the way that this whole process has happened. It's a political agenda. The Christchurch massacre was done by a foreign terrorist who broke all the laws and was a criminal, and he should go to jail they should throw the book at him. But then on the flip side, to use that to lever into law-abiding New Zealanders and put in the laws that they've got in place and the way that they're giving powers to police. I mean, the conversation that the police are having in Chris Cahill around turning it into a criminal gangs debate, and skewing the conversation to make it look like there's a real big problem with firearms in New Zealand when there isn't. And they're basically politicised a whole legitimate segment of New Zealand that are validly holding firearms for legitimate purposes, and it's something that we as New Zealand have a culture of. We've always had firearms, we've always hunted, we've got a big rural community where they need firearms for pest control, and we have a huge amount of people that just love sport shooting or competitive shooting, Olympics, and the great tradition of the New Zealand opening duck shooting weekend with shotguns, and the deer, the annual red deer stalk, where everyone sort of goes out on Easter weekend and tries to get a stag, and that they're just totally ignoring that part of our identity. And I just find it like somewhat appalling that this government, in the way that it tries to behave, is just behaving in the most egregious way against fundamental rights that I've ever seen any government behave. Like it's the hypocrisy is unbelievable in my view. And when it all happened and we saw all this, like I'll admit I had some sleepless nights, and I knew there was some laws coming, but the way that they're treating licensed firearm owners, the presumption of guilt on a lot of instances, the abilities to not give you a firearms license when you've just simply been charged with something. And the problem I have is you're aggregating the powers, so there's no checks and balances. So the police are the ones that issue the license, they're the ones that take away the license, they're ones that monitor it, and they're the ones on the one hand that administer the firearms law, and then on the other hand they're enforcing and doing the Crimes Act, so they can raise all the charges. So if the police really wanted to get someone, they could just raise a charge. You've been charged, you disqualify with your firearms, and people it'll ruin lives and ruin careers. And some of the guys that use firearms are just maybe not the most upstanding citizens, but going into the bush hunting, shooting is a good way to turn lives around. Like there's nothing better than getting out and going hunting, and we've all done stupid things when we were young, and this is going to hardwire it for life. So you'll just be blocked from accessing a whole recreation and a huge segment of New Zealand's outdoors, and the use of firearms is just on the back of one man's gross terrorist act, and then the views of the police association around gangs. It's just like they're pushing legitimate firearms owners to the side and saying, we're not listening to you, we don't care, we've got our own agenda, this law's going to happen and you guys need to just suck it up. Then that's what my takeaway of the questions from some of the select committee members have been, is that they're trying to legitimise this. Again, it's a bit like the TAR thing. It's convenient. They've got a different agenda. They want to comply with some UN obligations. They need to put the gun register in because they've signed up to the protocol. And phase one is to register all guns, and they're really wanting to. They'll kill the clubs. So clubs like what you and I are party to will have to be registered and file, and they'll be able to give surveillance over anyone that they want that's part of the club. And they could, if they want, they could be unfair and unfairly take away firearms ranges, shut down clubs, and take away people's guns and take away their licenses. So, I mean, without getting too technical, it's just a whole lot of basic rights that they're undermining, and it's somewhat unbelievable that this is happening the way it's happening as well.
It's interesting you bring up that UN registry thing, and you're seeing it sort of happening in parallel with Canada. And I was checking with Ken Mackay that Western Canada, someone put up that Western Canada and the South Islands should join forces as a hunting mecca. Because a bit, it's more rural urban divide in New Zealand, but I think west versus east in Canada is a bit sort of polar opposites as well.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Like, I was reading the news today, and President Obama did a speech where he said, this whole woke movement, like when you're outraged about everything and you've got the moral high ground, and he said, he even said that it's gone too far. The woke generation need to realize that their view is just one view, and they can't be all high and mighty, and everyone's entitled to their own passions and their own views, and it's not up to one group of people to tell another group of people how to live their lives.
Yeah.
And at the moment, the way that things appear to me is that there's a bunch of people that are in control that are trying to tell New Zealanders how to live their lives rather than doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is, just providing basic services and meeting the needs of New Zealand in terms of health and education. And, they're putting their ideologies into play, and it's appalling. And I've never in my entire life seen it play out the way that it's played out under this government. And hopefully New Zealanders have woken up. I mean, the basic way of life in New Zealand has been attacked. I've got family that are farmers, and there's the fresh water stuff that's going on. Got family that are fishermen and whitebaiters, and they want to, stop the whitebaiting. Then you've got, Eugenie Sage negotiating a huge budget increase to get rid of deer and tar and chamois, and and then you've got the police and the people involved with police saying that no firearms are good firearm. We need to get rid of all the firearms. It's just,
except for them walking around armed, which I've said it to a few people. You don't want to sound conspiratorial, but there was kind of like, should Christchurch Central Police be armed? Next week, unfortunately, the terrorist attack happens, and then and previous to that, there was the tar coal thing, and then it was kind of like you say, it's almost like our liberties as individuals is going to be taken away, all of a sort of a run of things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for freedom, and within reason. You don't hurt other humans, and what you should do shouldn't impact other people. But if you're just a hunter and you're wanting to have a rifle and shoot a deer to feed your family, what's it to do with the government? If you're doing that in a safe, law-abiding way, they should be like, that's fine. We need hunters, and you need a firearm, and actually you're doing the nation a favour because we have a conservation concern, and we need to put everything into balance. I think everything in moderation is okay, but just the dial's just gone a bit too far, and I've never been political, but I assure you, this year I've now woken up to that.
Speaking of that woke, I saw somebody's Halloween costume was a guy had a millennial T-shirt on. He was wrapped in bubble wrap and had a whole bunch of offended stickers all over him. I thought that was quite good. Yeah.
Oh, I know. I'm not a millennial. Oh, well, I guess I'm technically a millennial, but I grew up in the pre-computer age. So I was born in the early '80s. So I'm on the cusp of where we could play Bull Rush, and you only got an award if you got first. And you know, like you had to actually, you know, go through the school of hard knocks. Whereas now, you know, it's a different world we live in, and you know, it is. You know, you do have to put your bubble wrap on, I think.
Yeah, no, I'm from the other end of the 80s, and we were definitely that transition. So some things sort of sit well, others.
So you didn't play bull rush?
We did, and I remember as a 6-year-old, you know, at a full primary school, breaking through and yelling bullshit as well at the middle of a Catholic school. So don't know what was going wrong there.
Yeah. I think the cutoff is that generation is the bull rush generation.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe we just were too. You know, everyone's still good, and the kids growing up now, they're going to be awesome, and they're going to have a great future. And I just hope that, you know, when we come up with issues like this, that, you know, mine and your sons can go hunting and own a firearm, and when they're, you know, 18 and they're at uni, and they can go to uni and feed their flat with, you know, venison steaks. That's what I hope, that we can, you know, still have all of that. That's the main thing for me.
That's right. And yeah, if my daughter wants to chase me around, then go for it. Yeah, mate. We're doing a good yarn here. Yeah, well, shit, yeah, 2 hours nearly. Where do people find you? Is it just the Instagram, really? They can check
Well,
it
it
out.
all started with my my web page about hunting books, but that's
Yep.
a bit dormant. So I listed every single hunting book I knew of, and because I couldn't find that resource, so that's just www.thehunter.nz,
Mm-hmm.
and that's all about books. And then yeah, the Insta, I just put up what I like, do the odd book review, just put personal stuff up, and that's at the Hunter, or the Hunter NZ, which is the_hunter_NZ. And just put up what I like to do and about hunting and the odd thoughts, and you know, just getting after it. Really, I'm just a humble rec hunter.
Wicked, mate. Cool. So usually I get people to leave us with a thought or an idea or even a quote or a question even that they can answer you on your Instagram or something like that. What would you like to leave us with?
I'd like people just to think about joining up one of the clubs or societies, and you know, think about what hunting means to them and what it would mean if it was taken away, or their family couldn't do it, or their children, or they couldn't enjoy the outdoors with their mates the way that we currently do, either with, you know, the freedom to have firearms and the freedom to hunt animals in reasonable numbers. And if you you know, you want to investigate it further, I recommend going to an NZDA meeting. Join your local branch, because they've probably got the biggest network of clubs in New Zealand. And don't go to the first meeting and ask for a hunting spot. You know, go to a few meetings and make friends, and people will invite you to their hunting spot. I can assure you. Once you know, get a bit of a common rapport, and people will be keen to take you hunting and get you a deer. Like, no doubt you didn't get invited the first time you met Ben to go and shoot a seeker.
Nah, but it was a few meetings later, and I said, I was so grateful. I said, mate, you're a bloody legend. And
He's a legend.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
mate, go and meet more legends. Everyone should meet a whole bunch of legends at deerstalker clubs. That's what I think.
Yeah, epic. I'll press stop there, and that'll be us. Awesome.
Cheers, Ryan. Great.